Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 70 in the Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. Got that right now. To tell you what, I got to confess, I'm cheating. My monitor is right behind the laptop, so the slide numbers or the episode numbers right there. Anyway, today is kind of a war story day. It's best of the worst. It was originally and vice versa, the worst of the best. But the funny thing, we tend to have a lot more fun when we're talking about the stuff that went sideways. So we're going to show a few pictures. I'll give the caveat right now. I am not going to identify any of the sites in question, and do understand that in a lot of cases, things have a way of evolving and getting away from us. So we don't cast blame. We're just going to see if we can learn some things. And there's almost always something to learn. I guarantee you that. To help me out with that, I, as always, try to find somebody smarter than me. And this week I picked on Shane Tobin. Shane, welcome aboard. Shane's been doing broadcasts since he was like almost before a preteen, right? You walked into
Pretty much.
when you were like 14, 13?
I walked into KAXE Grand Rapids, Minnesota when I was about 13 years old, and little did I know that I would be, the caretaker for a 100 kilowatt Class C flamethrower that covers all of northern Minnesota.
So you've not only let's see, so that'd be, without giving things away, more than 20 years ago now.
It's actually closer to 30 now, so
Hey, I was being nice. I was trying to be nice
that's
here.
okay. I own it, man. I posted on my social media yesterday. My body turned 40, and I think its warranty expired.
Yep, yep. Yeah, that I think it's fair to say that's true for all of us. There are a lot of things about getting older that they just don't put in the manuals. Now, we're going to, and Jeff Wilson says, wow, you still got hair. He assumed you would have pulled it all out in Laramie last week. And that'll figure into the conversation today too, I'm sure,
We'll
in a little
talk
bit.
about that, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I didn't post pictures, so there you go. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to talk about that. Before we get rolling, let's do the mandatory housekeeping stuff. This Nautel webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, does qualify for half of a recertification credit under SBE Category I. So if you're an SBE member, absolutely, keep track of this, and whatever you write these things down in for looking up certification. I probably should get started on mine. I think it runs out in January. So we'll start taking notes. But keep track of that. If you're not an SBE member, well, why not? I know there's a lot of things. Shane, quick plug, you're running for the board, I believe. I thought I saw something in the announcement that came out the other day.
I am. In fact, I think this will be, I think my second term on the board. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. By the way, I'm really enjoying being a part of that organization. And I'll put in another quick plug. If you're not participating, why not get involved?
And in full disclosure, I got invited to an education committee meeting about 6 or 7 months ago, and I kept coming, and I'm not sure they regret that decision yet or not, but I'm quite certain they will at some point. Anyway, we also try to make these sessions as interactive as possible. There is a little window to type any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns. If I can find a way to fit it into the conversation, I will absolutely do so. I've got the little window right here. As I said, I've already got Jeff Wilson's comment about Shane and his hair. So, feel free to put those in there anytime. Though, look, there's 70 sessions and I keep coming back. I'm not sure if that's a comment on the quality of the education or whether you're a sucker for punishment, but thanks very much. We definitely appreciate it. Also, if you've got a microphone and you're not shy, there's a little hand wavy icon on your control panel. You can absolutely click on that and make it, we'll unmute you and make you part of the conversation. Want to give a shout out too, although we typically have a lot of most of our attendees tend to be domestic, Canada, US. We've got attendees from all over the world at these sessions, and I really appreciate all of you, especially with the time changes. I see, for example, Vaughn Taylor's in here from South Africa, so shout out to Vaughn, and thanks for paying attention, because it is getting pretty late in the day over there. So again, thank you. Let's carry on. So the cool thing was, when we put these invitations out, there is a little space on your registration to do advanced questions. Y'all are cowards. Nobody, now not quite nobody, nobody wanted to draw attention to themselves and say, hey, so I've got a site that, it does this and it's done that, and what should I do, or anything like that. Now, we did get a few submissions, and credit to those. We ran a little contest, so we just sort of collected submissions. Want to give a shout out to Andy Lowe out of Michigan. Andy is the winner of the grand prize swag kit, and there's a few others that'll be going out as well. But Andy, not only did he send me some pictures, and I had the advantage of being able to take a few when I was at his site not too long ago. He gave us permission to use them, and that's really cool because, like I said, these aren't about shaming anybody for anything. It's about trying to learn and how we can fix stuff. And starting on that, Shane, I threw Shane under the bus, right? When I asked him to do this, I said, by the way, I saw a while ago, and years, I think, you had posted something, but memory's funny like that. And I said, I'd seen that you posted something about a site, and I wondered if you had those pictures available, and coincidentally, he did. So now, if I'm not mistaken, there was somebody who looked a lot like you taking the tower picture too.
Yeah, so this was about 7, 8, 9 years ago, back when I was feeling really ambitious and actually did get my tower climbing ticket, had all the gear. I was working for the university at the time, and we'd ask them, because most of what we did at the time was pretty small stuff. We asked them, okay, can we climb towers? Sure, why not? So anyway, I had my tower ticket. I owned climbing gear. So I also was doing some contract engineering at the time, and one of my contract clients had called me up and said, there's something going on out at this site, out at our FM. We're getting a lot of reflected power, and it's just not getting out and all that. So I'm like, okay, sure, I'll go take a look. So I get out there. Okay, I look up the tower. It's starting to get a little bit darker at the time. I'd already looked in the building. I'd seen all that stuff, and was like, okay, something's not right. SWR is high. Okay, that's all. So as I'm getting ready to leave the site, I look up. I see this tiny little blue arc, tiny little blue flash coming from up the tower. I'm like, well, that's not good. um, and I can actually, it's pretty quiet. This is Wyoming, so it was pretty quiet. I can actually hear the modulation, and it's like, okay, that's not normal. That's not right.
Oh, it is if it's an AM button.
Well, if it's an AM, maybe. Yeah, we'll get to that though. Speaking of which, we'll get to that. So I call up my client and I go, you're not going to like this, but your tower or your coax is actually singing up on the tower. There's an arc, so we're gonna have to get up there and check out the coax. So yeah, I go back. I get all my climbing gear, come back the next day, and I climb the tower. I get up there, and what do I find? This. Well, there's your problem right there.
That's not the ideal configuration for a snapstack hanger.
Certainly is not. Yeah, so things had failed at basically this clamp, this cable hanger had burned right through the coax at this location. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit as well. All right. So as I keep looking around the site, I'm going, okay. Somebody has put a skirt on this tower. And this little box you see here and the wire and all that fun stuff, this would be the coupling. Notice the ground arrangement, or lack thereof, I should say. Yeah, so I'm going, okay, that's definitely not right. So yeah, somebody had put an AM up on this tower, unknown to me, unknown to the client. I knew there was a skirt on it, so I figured that was what was going on as soon as I saw this. I'm like, okay, so I kept investigating. The more I looked, the worse it got. So what we're looking at there on the left is actually, I guess, the grounding arrangement, maybe.
I guess.
And on the right, we're looking at, I think we're looking at the something involved with the feed there. But in any case, it certainly doesn't look healthy. I mean, it was a mess. Um, so, I mean, it's not uncommon to skirt a tower to put an AM on it. That's not uncommon, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of broadcasters do it. It's a good way to to have AM and FM coexist without having to deal with isocouplers and things like that. But this isn't how you do it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I know our service managers on site, so shout out to John and his crew for the amount of work they do, and I'm sure in the back of his mind he's composing the email that says, so what's their warranty status? But safe to,
So
as you said, 7 or 8 years ago, safe to say it's long out of warranty now. This,
exactly, yeah. I don't even know that the facility is there anymore. I mean, this was 7, 8, 9 years ago, but
but
yeah. So this wasn't my transmitter building, but this was where the AM was. I'm like, okay, let's see what's going on here. First of all, I wanted to see if it was actually on, so I knew I wasn't gonna, shock myself to.
yeah.
So I open it up, and this is what I see. Like, the first thought that came to my mind was, oh, that poor XR, what did it do to deserve this?
Well, and this is where you give the shout out for, like I said, learning curve number one. And I get that in a lot of cases, keeping the space to a minimum is ideal, especially if you're paying by the square foot.
Right.
But but really, you need to have enough room to be able to get around. And when things become a storage area, that can be an issue. And I mean, I've walked into one or two over the years that were one step removed from a hoarder house, with little footpaths through through towers of old equipment. And it's not only a hazard, both from a safety and a fire perspective, but it just
Well,
makes it hard to do your job.
I mean, let's
Mark,
face it. Yeah, engineers
Mark's
tend to be
saying,
hoarders.
yeah, Mark's in the audience going, I wouldn't put any transmitter in a building with a roof like that. And I wish I could say that this was the only picture of a roof like this you're going to see in the next hour. I'd be
Yeah,
lying.
same here.
It happens a lot. Now, understand that, especially you're talking Wyoming here, but the entire Midwest and a good chunk of the country, high winds happen and
Oh
roofs
yeah.
get peeled back in occasion, or ice comes down and drops a hole. And on a rare occasion, you need to do a temporary fix that may be slinging a tarp from the rafters, or a tarp rather, and keeping the liquid off the gear. But what's the phrase? Radio station temporary.
Yeah, exactly. Radio temporary.
Yeah. A lot of times it gets really easy for that to become the permanent solution.
Yep.
And like if you look over in the right-hand corner, obviously somebody knew that the uninsulated steel building was going to get a little toasty. So they created a exhaust fan.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, the more I looked, the worse it got. Um, so you can kind of see, I mean, on the left picture there, that's literally the only room there was to get around that transmitter. I mean, there was a ladder in the way, a chair in the way, all kinds of stuff there. There's a computer back there. Um, yeah, and then of course you look at the electrical panel and go, oh my goodness, not covered, nothing. It's
Wires that are cut, I can see to the right.
Yeah, yeah. It just got, like I said, it just got worse and worse. And then, of course, the cooling system, and then just even in front of the transmitter, there was no room to move around because you had, spools
Yeah.
of cable there and various other things. So,
Right. And so that is, I think, one of my biggest pet peeves. Obviously, ferrates are my biggest pet peeve, but we'll talk about that later too, of course. But if you've got a transmitter site, it's sometimes an ongoing battle to keep the sales and promotion guys from storing all their crap in it.
yep.
And, sometimes that's a battle that needs to be fought.
Yeah, that's especially true at sites where you've got a co-located studio and AM facility, for instance. And yeah, there's still a lot of those out there. And I used to fight that battle. There was another AM station I worked for in Laramie for a while that I used to fight that battle all the time and say, no, the transmitter room is not a storage room. Get this stuff out of here, put it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. And even there's if you've got a big enough facility, maybe yeah, you could build a little storage closet or whatever, or an 8 by 8 plywood divided area where okay, that's your place, keep your stuff in there. But when you're in a crowded building like this, I mean, again, there's just an obvious safety issue going on. Now, I have a dumb question, and
Mhm.
because you're the guy that was on site, I'm going to ask you, and you can shrug your shoulders. I see an air conditioner on the back wall.
I don't even remember if that thing was operational, to be honest with you.
Well, no. So the question is, this is an uninsulated corrugated steel building
Right.
in the middle of Wyoming, where
Hmm.
in the summertime it can get pretty toasty.
Yep.
Um, how much do you think that air conditioner actually could accomplish at the best of
Oh,
times?
not all that much. I mean,
Right.
especially in a building that's literally just corrugated metal with no insulation.
Yeah.
So,
So that's one of those cases. And again, situational things vary. You do what you can do with what you got to work with. And I suspect what happened, somebody had done some upgrades at home and had a spare window air conditioner and said, here, you can use this, maybe it'll help. But it might have been an argument for a couple of cans of spray foam before you went that far.
yeah, it was probably more likely a case of, going over to the local Home Depot and go, okay, what do you have that doesn't cost a whole lot of money, and
Yep, yep.
tossing it in.
Oh, let's see. I've got comments. Wouldn't put any transmitter in a building with a roof like that. And then the next comment immediately after that. Here in pick your East Coast state, that is a regular house roof. Um, we won't name the state either, but thanks, Curtis. Let's see. Mark wants to know if there are any rodent squatters in the building.
Not that I encountered, but it wouldn't surprise me. Same with reptile, with snakes. I didn't encounter any
Yeah,
snakes up there either, thankfully. So,
yeah. Jeff Wilson's making a crack about my biggest pet peeve not being ferrites, but in-house stuff. And we won't go down that road right now either. Shane and I had that conversation earlier. Um, let's see. So that picture, it's like I say, there's a lot of things, but most of what we see here, a lot of it could be fixed with a half hour or a couple hours of just getting the crap out of the building.
yeah, easily. I mean, none of this is stuff that really takes a lot of time or a lot of effort or a lot of money. It's just a matter of, paying attention to, just kind of
Well,
being
and
aware and paying attention to this stuff.
and that's kind of the challenge, and this is the thing I get going on about. And I mean, just from the folks I see commenting and the folks I see in the attendee list, not calling anybody out by name, but I can see half a dozen people that I know are maintaining easily double the number of stations they were looking at 10 years ago. And it's real easy to run out a day long before you run out of things to do. I mean, shoot, I see it every day with what I do.
So
So,
here's my response to that. I hear that a lot, and I mean, I've got a lot on my plate. We all do. But if you take a few minutes to do something at a site, it will ultimately save you time later and effort later in
well,
most cases.
and so
So,
what I do here, because I've got a woodworking shop back down here in the basement behind my office, and of course, because I'm project oriented, I got something I'm doing it. And the tools will go over wherever the tools go. And at the end of a couple of months, there's a big old pile and I can't find anything. So I've made it a habit now, anytime I walk through that room, I straighten one thing. Doesn't have to be anything big, just one thing. So the goal is when I walk through a room, I leave it better than it was. And
absolutely.
I've tried to kind of adapt that to almost everything. So open up the laptop to do an email, do two emails, or
Yep.
file something, which
Yeah.
I'll be the
And,
first to admit I suck at organization. Well,
hey,
my wife,
you're preaching to the choir. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to do it all at once. I mean, every little bit chips away at it, and
yeah.
eventually, yeah,
Now William mentions that a gallon of gas and a road flare later, and the problem could be solved too. But then you got the insurance company, or
mhm,
worse, no insurance, and the whole off-air thing, and there's challenges involved that with that too.
yeah,
Um, and Curtis makes a good point that if you do it right the first time, usually, even if that takes a little longer, it takes a lot less time than doing it over later when
it's
the
true.
thing burns down. So yeah, and again, that's and it's one of those, especially these days, because we do get spread so thin. It's easy to find things just get kind of left go, or I had an example. I was at a site a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of growling about the foliage, and it wasn't this site, but it was, and it
Mm,
wasn't quite this bad. But yeah, we were fighting our way through 2 or 3 feet of hay to get from Tower A to Tower B type things, and it does come down to a cost. But so at that point, if you're spending $500 a year in paying somebody to come out and mow the whole field, maybe you ask them, well, what would it cost to mow a path from Tower A to Tower B to Tower C back to the phaser building?
right.
Or sometimes
And
you can compromise.
yeah, and I mean, this is something a lot of people don't always think about either. I mean, what's your time worth? I mean, yeah, you may front load it a little bit and spend a little bit more time on the front end, but it'll reduce that ongoing amount of time that you spend in the long run. So,
Yeah, and that's a good point. Everything comes back to just it's a cost of operation or an ROI analysis for everything. And if it takes me 2 hours to do it right, or it takes me half an hour to do it wrong, but that adds an extra 15 minutes every time I encounter that thing, and I encounter that thing 20 times a year, well, right off the bat, it was a heck of a lot faster to do it the first time.
yep,
And Williams
exactly.
mentions that's a very lean way of looking at things, and that's true. I mean, everything, almost everything we do, and although I growl about it because as an engineering type, I want 5 engineers at a facility, but very much it's one of those situations where there are going to be people that are looking at everything, and some of them are going to say it costs us $50,000 a year to put this contract guy on retainer and bring him in versus 85,000 a year to have somebody on staff, and they make the judgment call. So that'll
Yeah,
happen as well sometimes,
exactly. Valid
you
point.
know. And I don't have to like it, but I do have to understand that it will happen. So I see Dan's got his hand raised. I see it's been raised for a while, and I have not that been I ignoring you, Dan. It's that I absolutely was not paying attention. I apologize for that. Um, so I have unclicked the mute. If you want to unmute yourself and shoot me with anything, and if it was an accidental hand raise, that's fine too. Just leave yourself muted. But I'll keep an eye on the screen, and when you turn green, I'll assume you unmuted yourself and said, "Okay, yeah, no, I wanted to bring this up." In the meantime, scrolling forward, so we were talking about the roof at the old site with the tarp over, well, in that case, vapor barrier. And then we were talking about cutting down the grass, and sometimes you can have both.
Hmm.
And just for reference, and I've used this picture so many times that probably everybody's seen it 5 times by now, but under that gaping hole in the roof is an NV40 transmitter, a NVGV. No, that's the original NV series. Doesn't matter. It's about 120, $130,000 worth of equipment under the hole in the roof. That's an expensive solution to be protected with a $10 Home Depot tarp. So again, sometimes you really need to take the time, sometimes it costs more not to fix it than it does not to fix it. That it made more sense in my head. But so Jane, and I mean, you've been doing contract work for a lot of years. What do you say in a case like this?
Well, that's just it. I mean, you bring it to the owner and you say, how much did this equipment cost, or how much is it going to cost to replace this equipment? Or you show them how much is it going to cost to replace this equipment. Okay, how much is it going to cost to fix the building to make it more habitable for the equipment? And then, of course, there's always the old point of, if you wouldn't be comfortable in that environment, your equipment's certainly not comfortable in that environment either.
Right. And Dan makes a good point here. If you had to fight your way through the brush for an hour to get to the store, then that's off air time multiplied.
Yep.
Or if you're a contract engineer, I assume you're charging the customer for the time it takes you, from the time you leave till the time you get home. So at that point, that's another hour of your time. So it doesn't take too many of those hours to add up to the price of of actually doing it right, as somebody said earlier.
Right, and it can be tough sometimes. I mean, especially if you're, if you're a contractor, or even if you're a, if you're a staff engineer, making that case to management sometimes can be tough. But show them, do the numbers, show them the value, show them, what the real costs are, and a lot of times they'll be, oh, okay, well that makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Uh, Curtis asked, what's the FCC say about these kind of site conditions? And I think, and I'm going to get you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they've gotten, and I'm going to call them out publicly on it right here. They've gotten lackadaisical about that stuff. It's
Yeah,
a lot more, as long as it's running and it's legal, we don't care what it looks like or whether it's falling apart.
sadly, I think you're right. I mean, the rules had a lot in there about, everything down to the details of what the meters were supposed to look like and how they operated. But in these days, you just don't see that anymore. I mean, I know a number of the rules are probably still in the books, but as far as, having seen any enforcement actions on some of those things,
Yeah.
yeah,
Now, having said that, I mean, that's a situation where going back to when a lot of the rules, like how the meters had to look, were written, we were dealing with a lot more homebrew equipment and a lot
right,
less manufacturer OEM gear.
right, and
So they had to have a lot more rules there.
right, and in
Mark
fact,
mentions that they're only sticky about fences. There are more
well,
things.
there is that, yeah. But and in fact, yeah, you mentioned that, Jeff. The rules do now say that if a piece of equipment is known to be stable, then there's a lot more lenience there and that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Right. So, I mean, I get the reasoning behind it, but maybe and I don't know the answer to that. You might make an argument on the OSHA side if you're in rattlesnake territory, because, having to fight your way through several feet of snake infested undergrowth could be an issue.
Yeah.
Let's see, fire hazard in case of a brush fire, absolutely.
Mhm.
Funny, Mark mentions they're only sticky about fences. So here's an example of a gate. There
Wait a
was.
second. I'm no expert, but I think there's something missing here.
So this site, and bless his heart, I know the owner, and we're pretty good friends. He bought it from the original. Actually, he bought it from the guy who bought it from the guy who built it. And the guy who built it is long since passed, as is the guy who bought it from. The current owner has done a lot to fix this site up, so I don't mind putting it up because it doesn't look like this anymore.
Right.
But at the time, they were complaining about coverage. I mean, it's a fairly low frequency signal, not too far from the Mississippi River Delta, which should cover a good long way and barely reach the town limits. And I mean, this is a big signal. We're not talking little here. But ground system mostly gone because the trees growing through it. There were some cases when I went there last, they'd been doing a lot of deforestation, if you will,
Mhm.
and there were logs, like 1 inch logs dangling from the guy wires where the trees had literally grown around the guy wires. So in the process of cleaning up, those are all gone now, but he cut them above and below, trees through the guy wire. Like we're talking 4 inch diameter logs here.
I wish I could say I hadn't seen that before, but yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the ones where I show the ant's nest in the glass, the bowl insulator on the output of the ATU. You can see on the screen there. But the ant's nest was halfway up, so whenever it got raining or moist, really damp, it would tend to arc. So, yep, this is, again, groundskeeping is one of those things that as we get busy, it's so easy to overlook it. And it is something that really needs to be dealt with, especially on an AM.
Right. And I mean, if you don't have the time to do it, I mean, you can always look at, you could look at hiring it out. Again, just weigh the costs, figure out what the cost is versus, the cost of failures or the
Yeah.
cost of trying to gain access when you most need it.
Now, of course, the problem is when everything's running, the cost of failures is near zero.
Right.
So, it does take a failure. Well, at that point, you're off the air and the situation's compounded by the conditions. So yeah, it's a hard call. Sometimes I told you so is the only answer. But and
Yeah.
then we talk about cable management.
I
So
wish I could
I,
say I hadn't seen a site or two like that.
actually, this one is not too far from your bride's original birthplace.
Okay.
So this is yeah, upper Midwest is as far as I'm going to commit to. But it I'm going to send you a bag of wire ties. The black ones, please, not the white ones. This where it probably happened to begin with. But yeah, the so I driving by and I was at a site visiting up up in upper Wisconsin a couple of years ago. No, a couple of years, probably 10 or 15. Time has a habit of getting away from me faster these days. And I was working with the engineer, and then I was on the way to his site. I just mentioned, hey, I saw this tower, and it like a cell tower. You know, the cell towers, you'll have an entire face of the tower will be a wall of cables going up. And I said it was really cool because at about the 200-foot mark, they were all away from the tower a couple 3 feet and bowed out for about 20 or 30 feet. And I said it looked like a giant sail. It was the neatest thing ever. And I said I showed him the picture. He goes, "Oh, he goes, we had a straight line wind a couple of days ago." He goes, "I bet all their ties or clamps got broken." He goes, "Hang on." He gets on the phone. He knew whose tower it was, the cell company. He called their regional guy, called me and said, "Can you send me that picture?" I sent him. He goes, "We'll have somebody there in an hour." So, you know, and again, that's the concept. Stuff does happen. I get stuff does happen, but how fast you react to it is the difference.
Well, and again, you look at some of these situations, you go, that didn't happen overnight.
You No, something got added, something else got added, something else got, and a tie wrap broke or two tie wraps got cut to add something else and
So
so on and so on.
So Jeff, in a situation like this, I mean, ideally, you'd have an ice bridge between the tower and the building, right? But even if you don't have an ice bridge, I mean, I've seen some people put up like a good stout, cable, like a messenger wire between the tower and the building, and
Oh,
secure cables to that. So I mean, anything to help this cable management type thing.
right. And I mean, even a couple of 4x4s and a little bit of
Hmm.
concrete and 2x6 across the top, something, you know.
Yeah.
So there are all options. Let's put it that way. There's always options, and yeah, it's how much or how little you've got available to spend will have a big deal or a big impact on it. But the other challenge too is again a lot of times, and we've had this conversation, and I know he's in the audience, so I'm going to call on him in a bit, and he's I'm not going to say who he is in case he so and so has left the conference, but a lot of times you'll either have somebody younger who comes in or you get a site you see some of the sites where they kind of for whatever reason, and it could be all kinds of things, but you'll see quote unquote revolving engineers.
Hmm.
And I mean, these days it could be situational, it could be health related, it could be just don't like or don't get along with, it could be all kinds of things. But things will tend to keep evolving and everybody adds their own little way of doing stuff and everybody adds something. And so things have a way of growing out of control. And like on the left-hand picture here, I was the one that took the picture, but there are 3 power bars in that pile of wire. Now, power bars have an off switch. And the problem with an off switch is if you drop enough weight on it, you know, it wouldn't take too much impact or airflow or much of anything, somebody kicking a wire on their way by. And unless you know exactly what's plugged into that power bar,
Yep.
you know, you're pretty much off the air.
Well, and
So,
by rights, those are designed to be temporary power taps. Those are not designed for permanent installation. I know we see it all the time, but
yeah,
those are legally designed to be just temporary use only.
yeah. Oh, there we go. So William explains it. So that's why you solder across the switch.
Well, yeah, there's that. I've
All
seen a
right.
few
Yeah.
with those switches bypassed. Yes.
Tip your waitress. Try the veal. We're here all week. Um, But yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of situations that you'll run into over the years where you just look at it and you go, what were they thinking? And again, it's like I said, I try to be understanding, and I get that in a lot of cases, stuff evolves. And that's like I was saying, we were talking in the preamble. Let's see, Curtis, when I came into the studio I now work for and started cleaning all the dead wires that were cut and left, I found a power strip into a power strip into a power strip into a power strip to reach the outlet.
Sadly,
So
yeah, see that a lot too.
Curtis, we're going to have a picture for you in a couple of slides. And if Andy's still on, then we might grab Andy Lowe. I'll call him out just to give him time to prepare. But I don't know if Andy's got a microphone. Andy, if you got a microphone, oh, look, there he is. He's got his hand up already. Uh, so let's unmute Andy because he's already been warned. So Andy, if you hit your unmute button, you should be live and ready to roll. And that's, of course, if you can find the unmute button. It's hidden on the control panel. There's a little microphone icon, and if you click on that, you should be able to unmute. I'll keep an eye on and watch for it to turn green. Let's see. Ray mentions had a failure with an FM antenna array corporate feed cable using right angle heliax connectors and no right angle transmission line bends. So fatigue taking a connector. And that's a really good point. Oh, Andy's on his phone at the moment, so it's going to take him a little while to track down the unmute button, possibly. Well, in that case, we won't call you out, Andy, but we'll take your name in vain, and you'll have to defend yourself after the fact. Um, and it's not a defense thing, because I say, Andy, full credit, Andy gave me advance permission. He said you can use any of my pictures or any pictures of my facilities you've taken. So I really approve of the permission to use the learning experience. But yeah, Ray's got a really good point with lying. It's really easy to stress stuff if
Yeah.
if you don't orient it properly, or B, one of the examples, and I'll pick these transmitters here where we've got the coaxes going across the floor out of the bottom. They're going to the combiners you see in the back of the picture. But or the 2.5 in the right hand picture with the right angle. If you don't have proper support, you're hanging a lot of weight off a couple of small screws holding that connector onto the chassis.
Hmm.
And it can be very much a challenge here. Let's see, Bob is got let me see if I can make this bigger. Here we go. Oh yes, Bob sent me some pictures about cutting several hundred trees up to a foot in diameter and over 100 feet tall, including some that were interleaved in the guy wires of all three towers and over the satellite dish. Um,
Wow.
you know, let's see, and yeah, put a small ring of Tordon around to the edge of the stump right after you drop the tree to keep the keep it from regrowing. And that's another thing. Once you cut a tree down, unless you have totally eliminated the stump, it's a series of roots. It's just another place for a tree to grow.
Hmm.
So you do need to now. What do you do for that? I mean, these days, well, you got sites all over, so you guys have to deal with some undergrowth management.
Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah, you've got to remove it. I mean, if you don't get rid of that stump, or if you don't somehow, prevent it from growing back, cut it off, it
Hmm.
will grow back.
Yeah.
A lot of times sites that we have, I mean, the landlord takes care of a lot of the grooming of trees and grass and so on. But we've got one case right now where there's actually a couple of pine trees growing up through the path of a satellite dish, and
Mm.
because of the location of those pine trees and we there's really not a whole lot we can do about them, unfortunately. They're well, without going into too much detail, they're basically protected, so
Right.
we can't really do anything about them. So we got to find some other alternatives.
Yeah. No, you either pick another method of signal transport, you move the dish, or
Yeah,
you buy a new site. And I mean, obviously, some of those, there are varying degrees
yeah,
of complexity involved there.
yeah.
And that's a really good point, though. You mentioned landlord, and that is huge. A lot of and Jeff Wilson says the same thing as Bob did, put Tordon on the cut stumps to keep from regrowing. But in a lease situation where you're renting or leasing from a landlord, make sure that you have an agreement on groundskeeping, on site maintenance, on what
Yep.
they will or won't do, or what you will and won't do.
It's so important to have that stuff written into your leases and any contracts and so on. I mean, that way, it's all spelled out. So if there's any question, you can just point back to it and say, here it is.
Yeah. Yep. And so William makes a good comment here that y'all have a policy to inspect or visit each of your full power sites once a month and translators once a quarter.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, ideally, every site gets visited once a month, and yeah, translators quarterly. I mean, at the very least, there's a very detailed annual inspection checklist that every engineer goes through at every single one of their sites. So
Yep.
yeah, definitely, and that's important. I mean, this is something that I've talked about many times before. Is you got to visit your sites. Don't,
If,
you mentioned this earlier. If you don't visit your site, I mean, who knows? You might find that somebody's put something else up there that's going to cause you problems later on. Later on.
yeah, I clicked ahead a couple. If you don't visit your site, you might discover something like the left-hand picture has happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I mean, it's the right-hand one is again, sometimes things can be a little bit of an evolution. And that definitely should be an issue. Mark mentions that you don't see that filters need changed. That's a really good
right.
point. And
Right.
again, talking about evolution. Whoops, here I am hitting my laptop. I got it because the actual other cam is. And I'll apologize now. The big fancy cam that I usually use has been rendered inoperable by a piece of software that I don't have the ability to uninstall at the moment. Having said that, I'm told that there's new hardware on the way, so I'll resolve all that issue at some point in the near future, and there's no point in messing with it now. Anyway, I also had to watch my hands, and when I start talking French and Italian, I just can't start banging the laptop with it. So
So
other example, like this picture on the right is an install, and somebody sent and goes, "What a mess!" And I looked and I go, "Seen a lot worse. It's not
yeah, it's
terrible."
actually not bad. Not terrible.
Now, the one thing I wouldn't necessarily do, I'm not a big fan of putting the surge protector in the rack if you can
Right.
avoid it at all. Even on a translator, and this is not, but even on a translator, I'm not a fan of that. I like to have the surge protector over by the electrical entrance whenever I can. Now, there are cases where, like in a high rise, for example, that's not possible. The electrical entrance is in the building and you're on the 80 something floor, then you're going to put the surge protector close as you can to the disconnect for your gear and call it as good as you're going to get.
Right.
But in a case like this, having the surge box in the rack, because the surge box is the path between ground and the AC lines. And
Yep.
that means that you are quite literally directing the surge current into the rack. And that's about the last place we want the surge current. So yeah,
Yep.
if you can, don't leave the surge box or don't put the surge box in or anywhere near the equipment racks. Okay, so just a little side note there. Back to your satellite dish question. Dan suggested raising the dish by extending the height of the base pedestal, and that's
Well,
fair enough. It's a
and
solution, but it's temporary.
yeah, and ultimately, I suspect it'd probably end up being something like that that'll have to happen. I mean, there's an
Yeah,
alternate location as well, but even that location is not ideal.
ideal.
So
Yeah,
it's got other issues.
and trees do tend to continue to grow at some point. So yeah, like you say, definitely the situation will dictate what happens.
Yeah.
Um,
So
So this is the one that Andy was talking about, and that Curtis was talking about, the plug into the plug into the plug into the plug into the plug. Um, so and I know Andy's occupied, so he can type anyway, so he can throw sarcasm and shade at me as he needs to. But he was rebuilding a studio, and what you're looking at the right was plugged into one wall outlet to run the entire studio. And again, not casting fingers or pointing blame at anybody. It's just one of those things where things have a situation or a habit of evolving. You know, so you've got a power bar with something running into it. You plug another power bar with maybe a junction box and a duplex outlet off it to do something else, and somebody else comes along and wires a quad or dual duplex outlet onto that, and things
Yeah.
kind of grow.
Well, I'll kind of, I'll kind of add to that. Power distribution units are your friend. They come in all shapes and sizes now. You can get them what they call 0U that sit in the back of a rack, kind of mount to the back rear, to the rear of the rack. You can get them in, 1RU or 2RU form factors that mount, in the rack itself.
Hmm.
I mean, those are definitely a much preferable option than chaining power strips together. And again, I mean, yeah, it's going to cost a few bucks to do it, but again, it's the right way to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, even at the home level, like I just bought a 12 outlet power bar for my entertainment center. And
Right.
that's exactly what it's replacing about three of those little temporary plastic power
Yeah.
strips.
I mean, they
So,
even sell these, these really long power distribution bars at, at home improvement stores and big box stores. I mean, they're not.
yeah,
I mean, if you go that route, they're not really terribly expensive. But I mean, if you
right.
order something like from, like a Trip Light or Middle Atlantic or any of the other number of vendors that are out
Hmm.
there, I mean, yeah, you'll get a really solid, really solid solution. I mean, in our case, the racks that we deploy, they're all pre-built. So they have the power distributions built in and basically just plug into a socket that the electrician installs. And
Yeah,
there you go. In fact, I think Europe actually requires that every rack has something like that in it for all the equipment in that rack. So,
right. And let's see, scrolling up here, so that one got the comments coming. Andy did mention that in his case, the studio was being moved whole hog, so it wasn't a rewire. He was ripping out and rebuilding from
right.
scratch, which sometimes that, again, sometimes that is the solution.
It's always a very satisfying feeling, though, I bet.
Well, now the downside, and I ran into this once, cleaning old wire out of a rack and cut a four conductor phone wire that should have had nothing on it, and ignored my own trust but verify principle of measuring every single conductor before actually doing that, and discovered somebody thought it would be a great idea to run 120 volts for a signal line
I,
through these four conductor phone
I
wires.
think many of us have at least one pair of side cutters that have a hole in the blades to remind us of that.
Well, now they're an efficient pair of wire strippers, so there's
Right,
that.
right.
Let's see, William mentions ran into a situation like the picture, except that no covers were installed on the 4-inch by 4-inch boxes. The place was held together with clip leads, and well, you can imagine where one of them wound up.
Of course.
Yeah, well,
Yikes.
guaranteed if there's a open 120 volts anywhere and there's a clip lead, point A and point B will come together.
Hmm.
Curtis mentions that with his, it was just the power bar to power bar to power bar was just being used instead of an extension cord, so it was
Oh,
only
that's,
one to one.
yeah.
It's still kind of janky, but it's arguably better than potentially loading the heck out of a circuit.
Right.
Now, and we've all seen the picture of the disconnect where the fuses have been replaced with either screwdrivers or chunks of pipe
Bullets.
or whatever, or yeah. Jerry goes on the right. That looks like a wind-up timer, and it absolutely is. It actually says timer on it. I'm not sure why, but that's one of those. We may have to bring Andy into one of these sessions at some point just so we can
You
have this
know,
whole
I
conversation
had
with
a
the whole
studio with
studio
something
rebuilt.
like that as well. I can't remember what in the world it was for, but I saw something like that once in a
Yeah.
studio. I have no idea what it was for.
Oh, here's a good one. I had a coworker who thought he was cutting a half-inch ground wire and discovered that it was gel-filled 24 strand fiber.
Oh no. Oh, there's a bad day right there.
Yeah, that's just exactly what popped up on my screen. Not a good day. Then there's the clowns who run 120 volts on 8451. Yep, build an
Seen that
audio
too.
wire.
Yep.
So yeah, and that's I think one of the things that it's like I said, trust but verify is huge. And I mean, I beat the drum a lot, but if you're not the guy that installed it, you have no idea what's been added or removed
And
or what's hiding in there.
And
Uh,
Jeff, I'll put in a plug for something that you mentioned a lot, which are those non-contact voltage testers. Those are worth their weight in gold.
yep, I don't have my laptop case with me, so mine is upstairs. But yeah, I mean, I carry one with me pretty much everywhere I go. And another shout out for the FLIR infrared camera, just so you can look at the breaker panel and see exactly how hot the breaker's getting when you connect the whole studio to one 120 volt outlet. So yeah, definitely. The one on the left is a little bit of a different situation. I mean, a panel is a panel. It's as far as panels go, I've seen better, I've seen worse. Um, but please don't leave them with all the covers removed, especially when they're 2 feet from the transmitter in a room filled with lengths of pipe that are laying on the floor, just waiting for somebody to go for a ride. Um, yeah, you will end up on one of these sessions at some point. So moving forward. The other reason for visiting your site now and again is when you got 240 volts in a puddle of water, that's usually considered to be a bad idea. In this particular case, this is at 50 kilowatt we showed before, and the new owner was showing me a lot of the improvements he'd made. And we walked in, and they hadn't gotten the air conditioning totally resolved yet. So as an interim, he had a window air conditioner, and the drain was on the inside. Less than ideal. And of course, it seeks the lowest point. Well, when I've got 1,800 pounds sitting on a concrete floor, it doesn't take too long for that to become the lowest point, as concrete is somewhat flexible. So that's kind of what happened in this case. Now, since then, again, like I said, full credit where credit is due. This owner has put a lot into fixing stuff, and this has been totally resolved since then. But nothing more embarrassing is the owner who's proud of everything you've done, walking in with the factory guy and everything's sitting in a half-inch of water. So, yeah, you know,
Again, that's one I wish I could say I hadn't seen at sites as well. Same kind of thing.
yup. Oh, here we go. There's the comment. Dan, best voltage tester in the world is to have somebody else cut the wire. That's both audible and visual.
There is that.
Let's see. The only good thing the missing cover panel is doing is that most mice won't make a nest inside the panel by crawling through the open conduit holes. So yeah, plug the holes, duct seal in the conduits where they enter panel to slow the mice down, and put the cover back on, folks. On the right, anybody who's heard me talk about lightning protection has heard me express my usually untarnished opinion about Jacob's ladder horn gaps. As they arc, every time they arc, there's a little metal migration. So you get little peaks on one side, valleys on the other side. You totally lose control of the arc voltage. The theory is good. You got the nice tight little arc at the, well, in this case, sort of the lower right, but the nice tight little spacing where you, well, not so much here because it's only a 5 kilowatt, so it should be a lot closer than that, but a fairly tight spacing for the arc to establish, and then it can just sort of quench as it works its way up the ladder. Downside, as I said, you have very little control over the arc voltage. Um, for less than $200, you can build a set of polished carbon balls with you can buy polished carbon inch and change spark balls. Ross Engineering in California makes them pre-threaded for a quarter 20 bolt. Takes you no time at all to build a set of spark gaps. So yeah, I'd like to see, and you'll look, I know Kintronic has been using them a lot over the past little while. So you'll start to see them more and more, but I'd like to see these go totally away. Comment here, air conditioner maintenance is every bit as important as transmitter maintenance. I'd argue in a lot of cases it may be more important.
Absolutely.
Alex isn't
Absolutely.
on, so we're going to call Alex out because Alex is the only guy that has taken one of my transmitters to the point that the plastic bezel for the touchscreen has started to droop down the front of the transmitter. Uh, Only guy so far. Brian's not on. He's number two. Um,
I got close, Jeff. I got close once. I think I've told that story before.
you did. But yeah, no, air conditioners. And again, if you're not doing a regular visit, a lot of this stuff, like, I mean, generators, you can usually remote test them. You can usually have status or outlets to let you know. On air conditioners, though, about the only time you know they're not working is when things start to shut down because they got too hot, or you have an external thermostat to send you an alarm.
Right.
You
So I
know,
saw somebody who actually had a really neat trick for that. Actually, there are several kind of cool things you can do for that.
cool.
Number one, you can measure the delta T, the difference in temperature between the intake and the exhaust,
Hmm.
and you can kind of monitor that. In fact, I think there's at least I forget the name of the company, but I think there's at least one company that makes a device just for that purpose.
Oh, cool.
I also saw another installation where they were literally monitoring the vibration of the thing. They call these things window shakers, right, or wall
Hmm.
shakers, right?
Yep,
Well, I
yep,
mean, you could certainly monitor for the vibration of the compressor and see if that, if that's not happening as you expect it to, well,
yep,
might be a problem. The other thing you can do is you can actually, put a little current transformer on there and monitor the current of the thing to see if it's,
yep.
cycling as it should be. Or if it's actually, if it spikes, you might see that it's, that you're about to have a problem.
Right.
So,
And I mean, I've got a guy that just grabs one of those regular old Honeywell bimetallic thermostats, sets it for 90 degrees, and then uses the mercury switch in it to provide a contact closure to his
yep,
transmitter. And the contact closure does two things. It selects a preset that drops the transmitter to half power when that temperature is exceeded, and it fires off an email to him to say, hey, you just went to the got too hot power setting.
yep,
So
simple and effective.
right, and you can still buy those little mercury switch thermostats for like 20 bucks. Again, Home Depot,
Yeah.
Ace Hardware, Granger, pick a place.
Yeah, I have a
Uh,
love-hate relationship with those, with the digital thermostats at transmitter sites, especially if they're
yeah,
battery powered. I mean,
right.
yeah,
Old and these old bimetallic coil ones with the little mercury switch. I mean, those things you never had to worry about the battery.
yeah, simple and
And
effective.
right. And I mean, all you're using it for is a switch, one end to ground, the other end to an input to select a preset. If your transmitter is configured to send alerts, whether it's internal through a user interface, like most of the current stuff, whether it's an older one with a remote control, like a Gentner or whatever, that calls you up and says, yo, we're on the power fail or on the high temp preset. So, it does two things. Number one, dropping the power in the gear lowers the exhaust temperature a lot. Well, by
It does.
whatever ratio you drop power. Number two, if you're running it if you get proactive about that, you're not making things run super, super hot. You tend to cut down the failure rate a little bit. So just something to pay attention. Shane's taking a note right there. See, maybe we had a good
Somebody
idea.
was trying to call me. I had to tell them
uh,
I was off.
um, Ray makes a good point here too. Annual ground system inspections.
Mm.
Ground system, especially because typically it's buried, it's easy to ignore, and all of a sudden you discover copper thieves took your entire ground system. And on some sites like AMs, you'll typically notice that fast because usually the SWR will go nuts because you lose the ground resistance. FMs, you probably won't notice until things start to fail. So it is a good idea to keep an eye on it.
Right. Well, and along those lines, not just the the RF ground system, but also the lightning ground system that you have at a site. You might, I mean, if you've gone to the lengths of doing something like a really nice, ring ground system and so on, gone to all the Motorola standard specifications and all that fun stuff. I mean, if you're on a shared site, you might come in and find out somebody has done something to just completely circumvent that.
Hmm.
And you'll definitely, I mean, if you've gone to the trouble to build a really nice grounding system, you'll want to pay attention to make sure that it stays that way.
Yeah, and that is a good point. Again, with shared sites, you don't always have control over all aspects. So, a lot of it does become a compromise. We're at the top of the hour and we're not done yet, I don't think. So I know there's half a dozen slides left. So, well, two or three of actual content and then some pre or post-amble, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, so just a shout out, this will be archived. If anybody's got something that they absolutely have to take off and do, understood. I'll see the attendees drop down a little bit and I'll be hurt, but we'll get over it. Uh, Somebody makes a good comment here. Let's see where to go. Sign Remote makes a temperature sensor that you can then set up telemetry alarms to call when it goes outside of tolerance. And yeah, Bard wall pack air conditioners have a nasty habit of locking out the compressor if the high pressure limits exceeded more than once. So you've got to keep the outside condenser coils clean.
Yep,
And
excellent
again,
point.
and that you know, as if you're new to a site, it'll be a learning curve for the first season, but you will over time learn what the, I guess, cleaning intervals are for your different sites. And if you're in cottonwood country,
Oh
that
yeah.
can be every 2 weeks at this time of year, you know, and I mean, that's where you run into situations like this. And so all three of these pictures were taken in the same trip 2 weeks ago. And cruising through the upper Midwest, they're all different sites. And they're all sites where I know the engineers and know that they spend a fair bit of time at the sites looking after things. So this is not what you would call a long
Mm.
period of time, but the stuff builds up fast. So again, you are going to need to, I guess, schedule. Do you? And we were talking about you've got the 1 month interval for the full power sites. So like pick a site, say Mississippi, where I know you can have a lot of cotton fluff come August, September. Do you guys leave it up to the local guys if they need to visit more often? How do you
Yeah,
schedule that?
yeah, so typically, I mean, the local engineer and the local contractors know that, know the region best. So yeah, we leave it up to them to kind of schedule that type of maintenance. And yeah, there are some sites where, like you said, like exactly like in these pictures where, cottonwoods really, the cottonwood really starts to clog things up. Or you've got some sites where even you have like wildfire season, and you'll have a lot of smoke particulate that starts to clog things up, and you got to
Yeah.
keep an eye on that as well. So.
And that's a good point too. If you are in a high wildfire area, brush mitigation is
Exactly.
sometimes a really, really big deal.
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, we always, I don't think any of us have not heard the phrase, and I think we've used it already, but radio temporary, radio station temporary. Um, so
I just saw the vice grips. Yeah.
now those are both used in grounding situations, and the one on the left purely was temporary. This was a very new build, like they were still building the site when I was
Right.
there. And 2 weeks later, he sent me a picture of the permanent CAD welded. It's like, see, I told you so. Don't put my picture in one of your. Yeah, no, sorry, that didn't work. Um, and we won't identify again. We're not calling. And the one on the right, those vice grips have been there just a little bit longer. And the one I didn't find, and I again talking about filing, my filing system needs a lot of work, and I've slowly been organizing it, and it'll be years, probably about the time I retire, I'll get it just the way I want it. But I've got a series of pictures where I took a photo of a set of vice grips holding the copper tube feed onto the skirt of an AM tower, and then I took another picture about 3 years later of the same vice grips holding the same copper feed onto the same skirt, except now they're painted aviation orange.
Of all the
Because it,
things I saw at that first site, the the vice grips weren't one of them, believe it or not. So there's
there you go.
something to be
There's
said
that.
there.
William says he's going to make me a plaque with vice grips CAD welded to a ground strap. Hey, if they're CAD welded, that's permanent. I'll take that.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, I'm flexible about this. So just kind of wrapping it up, you know, it's we do a lot of I do a lot of growling about the temporary solutions that become permanent, and I do get that it happens. You know, there are times when you've got to do what you got to do. You got to throw the tarp over the transmitter to keep the water off, or you've got to put the modulation transformer on 2x4s. I did not say that out loud. Um, but by golly, it had better be fixed really, really fast, especially in the case of a modulation transformer, because somebody leans on that thing, it's a very bad day all around.
Yeah, same thing with interlocks. If you have to bypass them for testing, make sure that you put them back to normal as quickly as possible.
I cannot tell you how many sites I've walked into where there'll be a note on something, airflow interlock bypassed. And it's like, if it's been bypassed long enough that you had to put a note on it, that's typically not a good sign. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, absolutely. So I guess the summing it up, I mean, the big deal is we still got to be able to have fun with this stuff. So somebody
I
asked me,
love
should
this
the
one.
ferrite go over or under the hard line?
Yeah,
And I'm not 100% sure. I want to say it was the same group both times, and the guy on the right was trying to outdo the guy on the left. So that was the one on the left. Shout out to Rod Tamnum with Northwestern Media out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Um, he sent me that picture and he said, "You said put the ferrite on the hard line. How's this?" Uh, Thanks, Rod. So the funny thing is, it is still funny. And let's say the one on the right, I think was one of his cohorts, but I don't remember. So if you're the person that sent me the picture on the right, rather than forcing me to go all the way through my emails to try and find it again to accredit it properly, send me a note and say, hey, that was me. Um, let's see, anybody use large ring lugs on ground cables installed with hydraulic crimpers? So that's a good point, Ray. I always make the argument that I don't like crimp connections because almost always they're being done with the improper tools and die.
right,
But yes, if you've got the proper hydraulic crimpers with the right die for the lug you're using and the lug is sized for the cable you're using, it should theoretically displace all the air in that and make a proper bond.
right,
So in that case, I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with it. The reality is that 99 times out of 100, somebody slid the lug over the end of the cable, set it on the floor, whacked it with a pair of vice grips half a dozen times, and then bolted it together.
yeah. The same thing goes for the screw down or bolt on lugs. I've seen that as well. And yeah, I mean it's better than nothing, I suppose. But yeah, it's
Well,
far from ideal.
it's better than nothing for right now.
Right.
But those things will oxidize, they'll get
Hmm.
loose, yeah. So the screw down, I mean, and give you an example, you are going to typically bolt the lug to a bus bar, for example, like
Right.
ground kit coming out of the tower or the transmitter building. You don't have an option there. I mean, you do have an option, but KED welding to 4-inch bus bar it's a lot
Yeah.
of fun, but
Yeah.
it's tedious.
Yeah.
And yeah, in that case, you really should be using the proper crimp lug and the proper crimping tool for the job. And that is something that we just don't see nearly often enough.
Yeah.
Um, Last shout out, when you walk out the door, make sure you close it.
One of my favorites.
Thanks. I like this one too. And shout out to Alex Hartman with Optimized Media Group for this picture. It's one that they one of their sites, and the site is relatively inaccessible. So, and in this case, it was obviously not on the air. You can see all the meters are at zero, but
Yeah.
and the exciter's missing, which kind of proves the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a testament for two things. Number one, make sure the door is closed, and number two, those little wise cams will work in sub-zero temperatures.
Another case
And
where I wish I could say I hadn't seen this type of situation at, at a site I
oh,
encountered.
I almost put one of your pictures up. So I've got the picture of the BE with the snow built up
Snow
in
in
the
the tube
final
cavity.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, because your exhaust fan or the exhaust fan failed or the wind was strong enough to overcome it.
Well, there was no hood over the exhaust, and the transmitter shut off, so there was nothing keeping the snow from coming in.
Right. So, again, stuff happens. I'm not calling anybody out for stuff happening. It happens all the time. How fast we fix it, how permanently we fix it, not radio station temporary, folks.
Yeah.
That makes the really big deal. On that note, this webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, will be archived at some point for posterity because anything on the internet stays on the internet forever. Speaking of that, I did some Googling and found some of my MySpace stuff not too long ago. I think that may have finally gone away though. Um, there will be a or a Nautel Waves newsletter, and somebody who looks a lot like me usually gets suckered into putting some tips and tricks in there. Some of these things may be in there. I really appreciate y'all for the input and the questions and comments today. That really helps the conversation flow when everybody's being involved. YouTube channel, online resources like Barry Michigan's. Barry said, "Can you put my cover page up?" And it's like, no, this is the picture I like because he's peeking out of a Nautel transmitter. But so I just want to give a shout out. Ed's sitting in the background, give away the prizes. And it's like, I already did that. So Andy gets the major kit. I think that I forget, 3 or 4 others, and I don't have the emails right in front, but you'll all get emails. Anybody who submitted anything is getting a prize kit. So what does Martha say? Not Martha, Oprah. You get a prize, and you get a prize, and you get a prize. So and Ed's in the background going, "How many were there? I don't remember. I'm old. I get away with that sort of thing." Andy does not get a car. Well, now there was a comment hitting the web. The web session not long ago, or the internet a little while ago, about the girl that won the Toyota. So yeah, maybe you get a new Toyota, Andy. We'll think of something. Ray wants Shane. Didn't we have Ray wants a webinar on your knock with the because talking. We did a remote control one really early on. I can't remember whether I had you or
Yeah,
Jeremy.
it has been a while, and it might have been Jeremy that you had on instead.
Might have been. So there may be something, Ray, if you go through the archives and take a look, but it'd be kind of cool to get in and talk, and keeping in mind that I know some of this stuff is kind of, I guess, proprietary, so you can't necessarily give all the secrets away, but it is really cool what you're doing there. All right, on that note, folks, I want to thank you all for hanging with us today. Shane, I especially want to thank you. It's been a little while, and it's
I always
a
enjoy
lot
being
of fun.
invited. Yeah, thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
Oh, my pleasure. And especially for you folks that hung with us for 2 hours and 13 minutes, give or take. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye now.